For 80 years, George Burns was America's favorite comedian. He earned a massive fortune valued at more than $30 million. His two adopted children believed, as most children do, that they would inherit it. But in the months before his death in March 1996, Burns made a decision that cut them out entirely. Every dollar, every cigar, every piece of furniture and signed photograph went somewhere else. His family was left with nothing but questions. And inside his Beverly Hills mansion, behind a fireplace that had warmed the same rooms for over 60 years, workers found a vault. What was inside? It told a story Burns had never told anyone out loud. George Burns came into the world on January 20, 1896, in a small apartment at 95 Pitt Street on New York's Lower East Side. His name at birth was Nathan Birnbaum. Life around him moved fast and loud. His parents, Dora and Louis, had fled hardship in Eastern Europe and carried old-world habits into their cramped New World apartment. They had 12 children, and Nathan was the 9th. The family squeezed into 3 tiny rooms where warmth came from bodies stacked together more than from any blanket. Louis worked as a cantor and barely brought in enough to keep the family alive. Dora scrubbed laundry for neighbors just to help. Most kids on the Lower East Side wore hand-me-downs and shared beds. Many nights dinner was nothing more than potatoes and onions. Even bread felt like a gift. Still, George remembered the laughter, the Yiddish jokes, and the rhythm of life in those rooms. That humor stayed with him for the rest of his life. Everything changed in 1903. He was 7 when his father died suddenly at the age of 47. The family had no savings and no backup. School ended for Nathan after the 5th grade because survival came first. He stood on street corners shining shoes for 5 cents a shine. The work was cold, dirty, and endless, but he kept going. Sometimes he earned a little extra singing with a children's group called the Pee Wee Quartet. One night their promoter disappeared with the night's earnings. George had nowhere to sleep and curled up in doorways, learning what real fear and real hunger actually felt like. Those nights left something in him. They taught him a toughness and a street-level calm that he would carry quietly for 100 years. As he grew older, his identity kept shifting. Family called him Natty. Other kids called him Shoes because of his shine box. He rolled cigars. He sold newspapers. He slipped into the back rows of burlesque theaters to watch comedians shape laughter from nothing, and he wanted exactly that life. During his early teens, he made a reckless bet and tried to swim across the East River. The current pulled him under and he nearly drowned. That moment scared him, but it also sparked something reckless and alive in him. He began trying on stage names like a man trying on coats. George Burns came partly from his brother Izzy, and partly from the Burns Brothers Coal Company, a business he had once stolen coal from just to keep his family from freezing. Later, he tried names like Willie Delight and Captain Betts, purely to fool booking agents and keep himself working. At 14, he felt the pull of the open road and answered it. In 1910, he joined a traveling stock company, hoping to make it as a singer. His first real paid performance happened in a Midwestern theater where he froze mid-song, forgot every lyric, and stood in silence while the crowd rained pennies down on the stage. He was fired on the spot. The humiliation stung for years, but he always said later that it was the best lesson he ever received. After that, he wandered through the Midwest, singing on ferry boats, in saloons, on street corners, anywhere that might produce a few dollars. Some days he barely ate. Some nights he barely slept. But he felt alive, and he kept moving. By 1913 he was 17 and still chasing the stage. He formed a singing trio with 2 sisters named Beatrice and Irene. They toured rough vaudeville houses filled with rough crowds. Then Irene eloped with a sailor and left George and Beatrice stranded without a cent. George begged for train fare home and returned to New York with empty pockets and a bruised ego. But quitting never crossed his mind. Those years taught him to improvise, to negotiate with shady theater owners who refused to pay, and to take failure without letting it harden into bitterness. When World War I arrived, he tried to enlist in the Navy. They turned him down for being too short. Instead of accepting that, he found another route. He disguised himself as a woman and slipped into groups of entertainers traveling to perform for troops on transport ships. It was a dangerous game. One wrong moment could have meant arrest, but he pulled it off, singing for homesick soldiers while praying he would not be discovered. He laughed about it in interviews decades later, but at the time it was pure survival instinct dressed up as entertainment. Reinvention saved him more than once. In 1916, he thought he had finally found his break when he teamed up with a dancer named Elsie Lorraine. They built a ballroom act and worked up and down the East Coast. Then Elsie left him for a wealthier man, and George was stranded again. He took a job as a soda jerk on Coney Island's boardwalk. As he handed out ice cream and milkshakes, he practiced material on every customer who would stand still long enough. Some laughed. Most just walked away. All of them taught him timing. He learned how to read a room and adjust on the fly, and he later said that counter job did more for his career than any producer ever had. By 1920, he was performing alone under the name George Burns full-time. He worked speakeasies during Prohibition where police raids could come at any moment. One night, he had to hide in a coal bin to avoid being caught. When he climbed out, covered in black soot, humiliated and furious, he felt, strangely, energized. Those nights made him realize he needed a partner, someone to balance him on stage and give him something to play against. That partner appeared in 1923. He met Gracie Allen in Chicago at a booking office. Their first meeting was brief, but something clicked. He asked if she wanted to try his act. They rehearsed, and George planned to be the funny one while she played it straight. But when they stepped in front of a real crowd, everything reversed. People laughed at Gracie's gentle, bewildered logic. Her voice, her timing, her ability to say the most absurd thing with complete sincerity pulled every eye in the room toward her. George saw it in the first 10 seconds and changed the act overnight. Gracie became the eccentric, and he became the patient, cigar-smoking man who simply let her shine. Their first show together at a theater in Newark proved the chemistry was real, and neither of them ever looked back. By 1924, they had joined the Pantages circuit. They earned $50 a week and saved enough to buy their first car. Life finally felt like it was opening. By late 1925, George grew uneasy when another performer began pursuing Gracie. On Christmas Eve, he told her she had to choose. She agreed. They married on January 7, 1926, in Cleveland, in a ceremony that was small but permanent. Weeks later, they signed a 6-year contract with RKO, which required that neither could perform without the other. It locked them together in a way that would last decades. The contract promised stability, but life brought its own complications. Gracie began fainting during rehearsals. Doctors eventually traced it to a heart condition that would follow her for the rest of her life. George had never imagined that someone so full of electric energy could be so fragile underneath it. She kept performing anyway, pushing through pain and exhaustion with a stubbornness that quietly earned admiration from everyone who worked with her. That condition eventually forced her to retire in 1958 and led to her death in 1964. But during their rise, she carried the show on her shoulders with a strength the audience never knew existed. In 1927, they headlined the Palace Theater in New York and earned $1,500 a week. Critics compared them to the Marx Brothers. The laughter from those nights rolled with them wherever they went. In 1929, they crossed the Atlantic for a 15-week BBC radio tour. The moment they arrived, British Customs seized George's cigars. He had been smoking since he was 10 years old, and suddenly had nothing to calm his nerves. So he turned the frustration into material, folding his withdrawal into the act. British audiences loved them. The tour made them international figures and proved that their chemistry worked in any room in the world. By 1931, they were performing in the Ziegfeld Follies alongside performers like Eddie Cantor. During one show, Gracie twisted her ankle mid-performance. The pain was sharp and sudden. George picked her up, carried her onto the stage, and she kept performing without the audience ever knowing anything had happened. It became one of the small, private stories that circled through the entertainment world, proof of how seriously they both took the work, and each other. Around that same time, George was making financial moves that few in show business dared to consider. While other performers spent their vaudeville earnings on clothes and hotel suites, he quietly purchased foreclosed real estate during the collapse. following the 1929 crash. He bought properties for almost nothing while the country panicked. When the Depression hit and theaters began shutting down, those investments kept them afloat, while many of their peers had nothing left. He had always understood money differently. He saw it not as something to spend, but as something to build into a foundation. Their film debut came in 1930 with Paramount Shorts. Their radio breakthrough followed on February 15, 1932, when The Burns and Allen Show launched on NBC. Each episode ran 15 minutes, built around Gracie's brilliant misunderstandings that somehow resolved everything by the end. By the mid-1930s, nearly 40 million people tuned in each week. Ratings climbed from 19.3 to 31.3 within a single year. They had proven that radio did not need rigid scripts to work. It only needed two people who knew how to listen to each other. Then, in 1933, Gracie ran a fake presidential campaign as part of a long comedy bit. She and George cooked up together. She called it the Surprise Party. She toured 39 states and had actual ballots printed. Some voters genuinely wrote her name in during the real 1940 election, which confused local election officials until they figured out what had happened. She promised to tax only clouds of the wrong color, and planned to hand cabinet posts to friends with nice outfits. The mascot was a kangaroo, and the slogan was, "It's in the bag." The stunt boosted their radio ratings by nearly 40% and made newspapers ask uncomfortable questions about how easily entertainment could impersonate politics. It was a joke, but it held a mirror up to the country, and a reflection made people laugh and then go quiet. Even behind the scenes, their partnership kept surprising people. George wrote nearly every script, but he consistently told the press that Gracie was the creative force. In an era when men took all the credit as a matter of habit, he wanted the world to see her talent clearly. In 1934, they moved to CBS for $10,000 a week. At a time when most Americans earned less than $2,000 in an entire year, that number was nearly impossible to comprehend. In 1935, they built their home at 720 North Maple Drive in Beverly Hills, right next door to Jack Benny, who had bought his lot the same year. Burns paid $79,000 for the house, the pool house, and the pool. That house would become part of his legend. In 1937, they worked with Fred Astaire on the film A Damsel in Distress. During one scene, Gracie panicked and forgot her steps, blurting out mid-take that she was completely lost. Astaire didn't miss a beat. He danced around her confusion and turned it into a spontaneous routine that had the entire crew on set breaking into applause. He called it pure magic afterward. It showed what both of them had always believed, that accidents handled with confidence were sometimes better than anything written in a script. On October 12, 1950, CBS aired the first episode of The George Burns and Gracie Allen Show, and something shifted in American living rooms. The show went live before a studio audience, which felt risky when most programs were still borrowing from radio tradition. But the moment George stepped out of a scene and turned to speak directly to the viewers at home, people felt pulled in as though he were sitting beside them on their own couch. The show ran for 291 episodes. At its peak, it brought them nearly $200,000 per season. It opened the door for the family sitcom boom that defined the 1950s and shaped television storytelling for decades. But the brightness on screen hit a private wound. During the early 1950s, George admitted in his autobiography that he had a one-night affair while on tour. The guilt, he wrote, was something he could not shake loose. To make amends, he bought Gracie a $10,000 diamond ring and a silver centerpiece worth several $100s more. She said nothing. She never confronted him. For years, the world saw them as the perfect couple. But the truth only slipped out in his memoir, released long after her death. And even that confessional moment carried Gracie's fingerprints. She had told Mary Livingstone, Jack Benny's wife, that she wished George would do it again, because she could always use another centerpiece. As the decade wore on, Gracie lost strength. She had lived with undiagnosed heart problems since childhood, but only in the 1950s did the severity become clear. By 1957, she was too sick to keep up with filming. George told the audience she was simply on vacation. She pushed through until 1958, then retired. On August 27, 1964, she died at Cedars of Lebanon Hospital in Los Angeles from a heart attack. She was 69. Her exit closed a chapter that had shaped an entire era of American entertainment. The day Gracie died broke him open in a way nothing else ever had. At her funeral he could barely stand. He later said he had cried only twice in his adult life. Once when his mother died. Once when Gracie did. For 2 years after, he kept an empty chair on stage during his live shows. He would turn toward it, deliver lines to her, and tell the audience she was just off stage for a moment. People wept along with him. That empty chair became the most honest thing he ever performed. By 1967, he had reached a breaking point. He was drinking heavily and smoking around the clock. During a Las Vegas residency, he collapsed on stage from exhaustion. Doctors told him he would not survive the year if he didn't stop. He quit everything overnight. No alcohol, no shortcuts. He said later that moment of collapse was the choice that kept him alive for another 3 decades. The comeback no one expected came in 1975 when he played Al Lewis in The Sunshine Boys with Walter Matthau. At the 48th Academy Awards in March 1976, he won Best Supporting Actor at the age of 80. Hollywood gasped. The following year he starred in, oh God, opposite John Denver. The film earned more than $51 million and became one of the biggest hits of 1977. He even had a clause written into his contract, allowing him to smoke cigars on set. Audiences loved watching a wisecracking god with a cigar, and the film reshaped everything about how people thought of him. In November 1983, at 87, he signed a 5-year contract with Caesars World in Las Vegas and promised to perform a special show on his 100th birthday. Executives quietly bet against him surviving that long. He proved them wrong, performing sold-out shows well into his 90s, and joking that the last time he played Caesar's Palace, it was owned by Julius. In 1984, he had triple bypass surgery. He was back on set filming. Oh, God, you devil within months. Sometimes working from a wheelchair, always keeping the camera from seeing it. In 1988, at 92, he received the Kennedy Center honors. He released a Grammy-winning album that same year called Gracie, blending his voice with archival recordings of hers. Fans sat in their cars and listened and cried. It felt as though he had reached through 30 years of silence just to hold her hand one more time. In July 1994, he slipped in the bathtub at 720 North Maple Drive and gashed his head badly on the soap dish. Doctors at Cedars-Sinai noticed his speech was slurred and performed emergency surgery to relieve fluid pressing on his brain. He had to cancel the long-anticipated Caesars Palace 100th birthday show that had sold out more than a year in advance. His health never fully returned. His performing career, spanning more than 80 years, ended quietly in that bathroom. He still made people laugh from his bed. He kept dictating new lines to friends who came to visit. He told jokes to Milton Berle and anyone else who showed up. In December 1995, too weak for any official celebration, he held a small, private gathering at home, handed out cigars, and told his guests he would see them at 101. On January 20, 1996, he turned 100. On March 9, 1996, he died at home from cardiac arrest. His estate, valued at more than $30 million, went to Sotheby's auction house in Beverly Hills that October. The sale included 266 lots. Among them were the large wooden humidor he had received in 1952 as the Cigar Institute of America's Smoker of the Year, valued at up to $9,000. His own smoking jacket and slippers, scripts from every decade of his career. The auction brought in more than $365,000 in a single day. Buyers included Jerry Seinfeld, who had often credited Burns' book Living It Up as one of the texts that shaped how he writes jokes. Every dollar of the proceeds went to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, the United Jewish Fund, and the Motion Picture and Television Fund. Sandra and Ronnie received nothing. Those who knew him well were not entirely surprised. Burns had understood something that most people only glimpse at the very end. That what you leave behind is a choice, not an accident. He had spent decades quietly building his fortune. investing when others panicked, buying property when no one else saw value in it, writing checks to charities while the cameras pointed somewhere else. He gave his children his time, his name, his laugh. He gave his money to the institutions that had kept people alive and working and dignified when they had nothing left. Inside that vault, behind the fireplace at 720 North Maple Drive, workers found what they later described to close family friends as a collection of personal letters, photographs, and handwritten notes. None of them were addressed to his children. Most of them were addressed to Gracie. Some were dated years after her death. A man who had made a century of strangers laugh had spent the last chapter of his life writing privately to the one person he could never replace, in rooms that had been theirs since 1935, beside a fireplace that had been burning almost as long as the act itself. George Burns left the world the way he entered it, without much fuss, with everything figured out ahead of time, and with one last joke that nobody saw coming.